And mother duck said quack, quack, quack. And all the five little ducks came
Hello, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're just about to start in 2 minutes. Okay, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning, Victor.
Morning.
Hear you.
Yeah,
Good morning.
we can see a lot of participants in the room. Karibuni. We would want, since we are few enough, we would want to know which media houses are in the room. So just allow me to just run a quick intro of the people we have in so that we know which media houses are in the room. My name is Victor Ogalo. I'm the head of policy research department at Kepsa. We welcome you to this launch of a report that we did in April, the second report surveying the businesses on the impact of COVID and interventions that they're actually carrying out within their businesses, and to just find out how can we all work together to help businesses stay afloat and cushion the jobs that there are there. So we have a report that we did between April 17 and 21st that we've been able to analyze, and there's some insights that we would want to share with you coming out of this report. The report will be launched by Kepsa CEO Carol Karuga. Carol, hi.
Hello, you can go ahead.
Yes. So do we go ahead and know the rest of the people who are in?
I think we go ahead because it's hard
we
for
go
everyone.
ahead. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So please stay on mute as we do the report. And if you have any questions that you want to ask, even as the report goes on, there's a chat function there. You should be able to key in your question. We'll be able to pick it and respond to it. Otherwise, we'll stay on the presentation to the end. Then we can have the Q&A session. So Kepsa is a membership organization, the apex body that brings together all the business associations in Kenya and the corporates at different categories, at different sizes. We bring in corporates and small MSMEs, micro and small enterprises together. So this survey actually constitutes views from all these members and the members of our associations. The list you see over there is the list of our business associations that are members of Kepsa, plus a lot of other corporates that responded to this survey. So the insights we draw from here come from a larger business community comprised of this membership. We engage a lot with government to advance some of the policy proposals that we come up with as a business to be able to cushion businesses and jobs. And we have a number of dialogue platforms that we have established. Within Kepsa, we have sector boards cutting across 17 sectors and federations. And with government, we have a lot of dialogue platforms. At the apex level, we have Presidential Roundtable. We have Roundtable with the National Development Information and Communication Committee chaired by Dr. Matiang'i. We have several ministerial stakeholder forums with all ministries, speakers roundtable with both houses, a forum with Council of Governors, Chief Justice Forum, platforms with selected state agencies like KRA, immigration, and so on and so forth. roundtable with development partners and regional forums within the EAC. So these are our mechanisms through which we have dialogues with decision makers and we are able to shape the development of the country together. So some of the interventions proposed in this report will be channeled through several of these platforms. So allow me then to invite Karo Kariuki to take us through the rest of the report.
Okay, thank you, Victor. Karo Karuga, CEO of Kepsa. Let me just mention quickly some of the private sector contributions as part of what we're engaging with government. What we've also done is also have the private sector be able to contribute to COVID-19. And what we've done is group some of our contributions into several levels. So the names you see here are not all the names, but at least we've managed to capture as many who are involved in the different areas. So you see digital resource and training. This is a big area for us. So we have a 24-hour call center and a toll-free number, 1196, which we're using a lot to collect a lot of information and also to be able to inform our members and link with other directories of other members like KAM and KHF, which are the Kenya Steel Manufacturers, Kenya Health Federation, which are our members who are focusing on manufacturing and also on health, and being able to link all that. And so we've also carried out web-based training for 2,000 volunteers and trained hoteliers. And we're also working with the USIU Africa on training of SMEs. I'll not then on donation of food, on donations to COVID-19 fund. You can see you have the list, and you've also seen the membership also putting out that list very often, at least every week, of what they're getting. Water, soap, and tanks. You've seen different companies also supply that, especially to vulnerable groups and in other places. And so that's a list of some of the ones that have been doing that, but there are many others. Food, we've also been supplying food and to different vulnerable communities. One of the biggest ones that our members are involved in Mombasa with the Governor Joho, but also all the different companies that have been donating food and to the vulnerable in different places, but also hotels that have also been giving to frontliners, the medical staff in different hospitals. Distribution on logistics and transport. Again, you've seen that with the different companies offer their logistic and transport facilities to be able to be used in this season. All this, when I say private sector contributions, these are what private sector is giving for free. Okay, maybe I'd have people mute so that it's easy for us to listen.
Please mute everybody.
Okay, next slide. The next slide also have thermoguns, thermometers, umbrellas, ventilators. So we've also done that, especially at the border posts, to be able to help movement of cargo by just giving the thermogun thermometers so that they can use for testing. We've also seen KM automotive sector give out a ventilator, come up with model ventilators, then sanitizers, masks, PPEs. We're seeing a lot of our own companies being able to either produce and give out or be able to sponsor some of these and give out to the different groups. Education, you've seen the different ones, IBM, Elimu, Longhorn, and others really come up with innovative ways to be able to give online education. Telecommunication support, you've seen Safaricom, Wananchi, Google, and others really come up with just rates that can really support in this season as people work from home, as children learn from schooling. Financing, Standard Chartered, ABSA, and others have come up with different rates and different models that can be used for financing, especially as businesses look out for cheaper credit in this season. Advertising and communication, media owners and Unilever and Brands and Beyond and others have given out just their own contributions in this area. Mattresses, partnerships with various organizations on mitigating, since Slumberland, Chandaria, Jumia, Coca-Cola, and others just really coming up with some of this. So these are just some of the, I just wanted to highlight some of the contributions the private sector is doing, despite the struggle of being able to keep businesses afloat, that businesses are really finding ways to give in this season. On this, let me just give a little brief of this survey. When we did a first survey, which we conducted beginning of March, just before we got our first case of COVID, we conducted a survey and 127 businesses did get back to us on that survey. And that gave us an indication of about what was going to happen and also what was starting to happen in the country, even before we got to where we are. And at that point, 61% of businesses said they were being affected by COVID. And many of them is because the ones who were importing from China, were being affected, in transport as the country started closing down in transport and movement of people. So at that point, that was a big thing. And we only had about 127 then. That really gave us a foundation to create a framework, which is what we've used to publicize what we are doing. The campaign involved multiple methods of information dissemination to inform and engage stakeholders, such as press releases, interviews, email blasts, and social media updates. We also created a number of resources to provide targeted support to the business community. And that's what I mentioned about the 24-hour call center, but we also have an information portal that we put all the government directives and all the information the private sector needs, and even the public. If you are interested to know what's happening in the business world, then you can visit the portal. They also shared the framework with the media at that point when we created it, and the wider private sector and the government ministries and departments and agencies. Then we also did a whole coverage, and that framework really covered the whole across all the sectors. And then that became what the instrument we are using to engage our business. You had Victor saying at the beginning that we have all these engagement platforms with government, and that when we create such a framework, that's what we use to engage government on the issues that are affecting business and what we need done by government, but also what we can do ourselves and what we can do together. The proposals in the framework also allowed Kepsa to hold discussions with various arms of government and influence numerous government interventions. We also presented that framework at that point on the 11th Presidential Roundtable on March 20th. And on March 25th, the President issued directives on a raft of economic stimulus measures aimed to restoring the economy by cushioning businesses, protecting vulnerable populations, safeguarding jobs during the COVID-19 crisis. These interventions were effected through the Tax Law Amendments Act 2020, passed by Parliament and assented by the President on 25th April. What we're going to be sharing with these survey results is that framework as updated by Monday this week, because what we do every week is update the issues as they're being progressed. So you receive these survey results, but also the updated framework as we shared with our members this week, so that you can see the issues we are progressing with government per sector, and also the ones that we call cross-cutting or macro issues that were developed that time, but they have been continued to be progressed. And you'll be able to see some of the ones that have already been done, like the ones in the tax law amendment, but also the ones that are pending, but also the ones that are being progressed, and some that have not really started, but we are hoping that we can continue to engage on that or come up with alternatives, because sometimes that may be an issue then, it's not an issue now, or there may be an alternative. So jumping into the survey, let me give you the executive summary, then I'll deep dive briefly into the details. So as I said before, when we did the first survey at the beginning of March, we had 127 firms respond. This time, when we did the survey, we had 2,466 firms participated in the survey. So you can see the jump between 127 then, when 61% said they were being affected by COVID, and now when of course the impact is much higher. And you've seen the list of all our members who we sent the survey to. So you're able to go through that list and see all the associations and all the different corporates that received this and the ones that have responded. And out of that survey, 29% who responded were micro, 46% were small, 16% medium, and 9% large enterprises. Education had the most respondents with 70% of the total, followed by construction 17% and tourism 7% of the sectors. Overall impact, the vast majority, 81% of enterprises across all sectors and companies sizes have been impacted. When we did in early March, it was 61%. So you can see the big jump as COVID has continued to spread in the what we would call the global South, Africa and the developing world. With 85% of those being small, 83% of being medium-sized, reporting high or very high impact compared to 78% of micro farms and 70% of large companies. On sector-wise, tourism and education were the most impacted, with 95% in tourism and 93% in education, of them reporting high to very high impact respectively, which is in line with health-imposed closures. Of course, you know, with tourism, with the world really closing movement of people, flights and all that, that's why, and education schools being closed. Sports, arts, creative and agriculture farms report the next level of impact of 90% and 81% respectively. And I'll be mentioning later when we go to the sector why agriculture at that point was that high. 81% of agriculture farms report high or very high impact, and it's the dominant GDP contributor, which means if the issues were not starting to be addressed, would have had a major challenge. At the point when this survey was done, were still facing challenges as people are trying to be able to move food and during these curfew hours and cross counties, but a lot of that has been resolved now. Also, the floriculture by then was not doing well, and we saw at one point flowers being thrown off in Netherlands. But again, we've seen that starting to pick up, and so that by the time we do the next survey, you'll see a difference in the agriculture impact. Finance, there are people who've not muted. Finance, health, social work, and environmental water waste farms fare somewhat better than the other sectors, with 47%, 50%, and 56% respectively reporting high or very high impact. So they are ones that are not the most impacted as the other sectors. Financial losses, agriculture, transport, manufacturing, and tourism, which are among the largest GDP contributors, report among the highest financial losses in real terms, with tourism and manufacturing reporting average losses of Kenya of between 30 to 40 million per company, followed by agriculture. Remember, this is real terms, so the numbers are high when you talk about real terms. Followed by agriculture and transport, reporting to between 20 and 30 average per company losses. Again, as I said, by the time we did this with agriculture, there were a bit of challenges, especially floriculture, but a lot of that has been resolved. This is especially disconcerting in the tourism. In the tourism and transport sectors, where the majority of respondents are micro and small farms. Next. Okay, moving on. On HR retention, 46 of all farms across sectors and companies have retained all their employees. 58% of large companies have not laid off any workers, particularly in the finance and insurance sector, where 93% of the respondents reported keeping all employees. In comparison, 55% of mid-sized farms have taken the full job retention route, while 52% of micro and 58% of small farms respectively reported laying off workers. The sectors most affected by job loss were only 20 to 40% of responding farms have been able to retain all employees, are construction, agriculture, forestry and fisheries, security, sports, art, creative and tourism. Overall, only 34% of respondents reported laying off more than 50 people, with agriculture being the most affected, particularly horticulture, which is in line with the export challenges that were being faced in March and April. And you've seen a lot of work being done around that to resolve that. So we're seeing less of that now than when we did the survey. Business closure, 45% of farms outside the education and tourism sectors have had to close business, at least temporarily, due to COVID-19, with micro and small enterprises being the most affected, with 62% and 49% having taken this route respectively. Education and tourism entities reported significantly worse impact, with 95% and 78% closing business, at least temporarily. Mitigation measures, overall provision of PPE and social distancing were the most popular measures taken by businesses. Much fewer micro and small enterprises report taking any measures to mitigate the impact of COVID-19. where over 80% of medium-sized and large companies have been able to provide PPEs to employees, only 38% and 62% of micro and small firms respectively report the same measure. Next. On government stimulus, there's significant optimism on benefiting from the stimulus measures announced by the government. Reduction of VAT, payee, and corporate tax are expected to benefit the largest number of businesses, but payment of pending bills and VAT refunds remain key points of concern, affecting ability to meet financial obligations and overall market liquidity. Request for support. From the survey, most businesses ask for financial support from government in form of grants or cheap accessible loans to cover operating costs, especially salaries. Many firms seek payment of pending bills, as well as reduction, waivers, or deferment of taxes, business licenses, and other statutory deductions. Another popular request is for government intervention to ensure banks restructure repayment of bank loans, rent, and utility bills. Across multiple sectors, companies are seeking measures with little to no financial implications for the government, including legislation to further encourage local procurement by the government, controlled exceptions to curfew for specific workers, and clear path to classification of certain staff members as essential personnel, as well as ensure police treats essential personnel respectively. I think, again, when we were doing this survey, that's when there was still a bit of challenges. I think we've seen a lot of improvement around curfew and movement of essential personnel. Rough scenario-based roadmap to COVID-related government action to allow businesses to some level of planning. Generally, the survey provides a glimpse into the COVID-19 situation from business lens and a basis for private sector and government towards building strategies for management of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'll move briefly into the methodology and demographic analysis without going to a lot of all the details. So below what the report was based on an open survey sent out to Kepsa and its membership on 17th of April 2020 and closed for responses on 21st April 2020. So, and attracted to 24,280 responses. And that's the reason. So anything that has changed after 21st of April is not captured here. And as I said, especially in agriculture and others, there's some changes there. And so they'll be captured in the next survey. We'll try and do this at least monthly or bi-monthly to make sure that we are keeping you updated. On determination of business size was based on a number of employees as reported. Micro enterprises and startups was, we classify them between 1 to 9 employees. Small enterprises, 10 to 50 employees. Medium-sized enterprises, 51 to 300 employees. Large enterprises, more than 301 employees. All categories contain more than 50 respondents. 75% of respondents represent micro and small enterprises, both formal and informal. In comparison, the March survey attracted only 36% of micro and small enterprises respondents, demonstrating the more ambiguous impact on all segments of the economy. This also suggests that large companies had more information to prepare early. They are large enough to weather a crisis longer than small enterprises. And so that's where you're seeing the impact is a bit less on large companies, just because they can be able to cushion crisis much better than the small, micro and small enterprises. Next. The breakdown by sector, what we did is ask the question, please select the main sector of your business operations. And apart from mining and quarrying, which in real terms is a sector with very few players in this country, all other sectors have attracted sufficient number of respondents for analysis. Sectors with, so the mining and quarrying, only we had less than 30 responses, again, because it's a small sector. And so anything that is analyzed is not as analyzed, does not represent the sector very well. But also, we also have others that had less than 50 respondents in some questions, not all questions, and they skip either, maybe skip to one or more. And so we got some 15, maybe 15 less respondents in some of the questions. And so the conclusions we've made on those sectors may not represent the full sector just because of the number of respondents in those sectors. And those are sports, arts and creative industry, environment, water and waste management, energy and electricity supply, finance and insurance. Something to note, 58%, 58 respondents did not select a sector of activity. That's the discrepancy with the total of the 2,466 participants. So some of them responded to the questions, but they did not mention which sector they belong to. So that's the reason why you'll see that. Next. In terms of breakdown by sector and company size, so the sampling analysis below table illustrates in green the sub-segments of sector and company size where samples are large enough, that is 15 plus respondents, and draw conclusions used as guideline in below analysis. So education representation is skewed towards small companies with 70% of respondents who responded in the education sector are mostly the small companies. Except security, finance, insurance, and manufacturing, representation is skewed towards micro and small enterprises with over 50%. So apart from those 5 sectors, the others were, a lot of the ones who responded were the micro and small enterprises for over 50%. But those 5 sectors, most of the ones who responded were mostly medium and large. Next. In terms of quantitative, the question was, to what extent would you say your business has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic? And the vast majority of enterprises across all sectors and company sizes have been impacted, with small and micro reporting the largest impacts. Large businesses had more information to prepare well, so they were not as impacted, or at least by then, by 21st of April, they're not been impacted as much as the small enterprises. When we do the next one, then we'll be able to tell what has happened so far. 81% of all respondents report high or very high impact of COVID-19. 85% of small companies, 10 to 50 employees, report high or very high impact compared to 70% of large companies who have 301 plus employees. In the health sector, only 28% of small enterprises report high or very high impact. Again, this being a health crisis, you can see that the health sector is really, really needed. So they are not impacted as much as those sectors that are not as needed right now. 86% of small enterprises in tourism sector report very high impact. 78% of micro enterprises and startups report high or very high impact. Over 90% of sports, arts and creative, tourism and education respectively, under 70% of real estate, agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and construction respectively. So again, as we said, some of the sectors like sports, arts, and creative, our conclusion is based on a smaller number that responded than the whole sector. So it may not represent the whole sector as we know, but we know, of course, sports and arts have been really affected, especially sports, because again, there's no movement, there's no, the issue of social distancing has really affected that sports are not going on right now. Next. Next.
Actually, we're there.
But again, to what extent would you say your business has been affected? Again, beyond tourism and education, under health imposed closures, agriculture and entertainment firms report the largest level of impact, as agriculture is also the dominant contribution of GDP. 81% of all respondents report high or very high impact. This compares to 15% who felt the same way in the March survey. That again was in the beginning of March. Tourism, education, sports, and creative sectors perceive themselves as most hit, with 95%, 93%, 90% reporting very high or very high or high impact. Finance, health, and social work, and in environment, water, waste firms fare better than the other sectors, that as I'd said, with 47%, 50%, 56% respectively. Agriculture, 81%. Again, this is around floriculture by 21st of April, and a lot has changed since then. Moving on to the next one. The other question that we asked was, please estimate the financial losses that your business has suffered since the outbreak of COVID-19. And this was impact estimate by sector. All examined sectors were adversely affected by COVID-19, with tourism and manufacturing reporting the largest average loss per company. Since the numbers are in real terms, large companies are likely to report higher losses because also they make the most money in terms of real, talking about the real numbers. 42% of respondents across all sectors reported between 1 million to 5 million Kenya shillings losses. Agriculture, transport, manufacturing, and tourism, which are among the largest GDP contributors, report among the highest financial losses in real terms. That's between about 20 to 30 million Kenya shillings on average for agriculture and transport firms, 30 to 40 million Kenya shillings on average for manufacturing and tourism firms. Healthcare, social work, and security have the largest percentage of companies with less than 1 million Kenya shillings losses, with 39% and 44% respectively. Moving to the next. Then we asked the question of how many of your employees have you had to let go during the COVID-19 pandemic? And that was state of employment, all company sizes, large and medium sizes. As a way to preserve some jobs, companies are often forced to resort to layoffs. The ability to retain jobs within large and medium-sized companies is highly dependent on the sector of the economy they operate in. A total of 20% companies showed that was a bit less than 1% of respondents have hired additional staff. So, and that mostly is where those who are doing PPEs and food, those are the ones you'll see mostly hiring new staff because there's demand in those sectors. Large companies, 300 plus employees are taking one of two routes. No layoffs, we had 58% report keeping all employees, with the majority being in finance, insurance, 93%, companies taking this route. Large layoffs, we had 34% report laying off over 50 people, with many being in agriculture, forestry, fisheries, 70%, and security, 45% firms taking this route. On medium-sized companies between 51 to 300 employees, we had no layoffs. The ones that had no layoffs are largely full job retentions in finance and insurance, for 81%. Large layoffs, 45% of medium-sized tourism firms have laid off over 50 employees. Only 15% report full job retention within the company. Something to also note here, between tourism and agriculture, a lot of them also do have a lot of casual workers who would just call them daily wages, who are employed during high seasons. So when the business is low, a lot of these people lose jobs. And so part of that, what you're seeing with the high numbers in tourism and agriculture, is also attributed to that in terms of low demand, a lot of those who are daily wage earners, unlike permanent staff, are let go until the next season. Moving on. So for the smaller firms, which have few non-essential staff, letting go of a few employees might be equivalent to closing shop, meaning that up to 5 staff lay off in a micro company, or startup may be as bad as 20 to 50, or over 50 in a large one. So again, here is where the company sizes matter. So for the large companies, when they lay off between 20 to 50, they may still continue to operate because they have over 300 plus. But for the small ones, when they lay about 5, it means they close shop. And so the equivalence of 5 is also what is an equivalent of between 20 to 50. And 5 in a small company is what is equivalent to between 20 and 50 in a large one. So for small companies between 10 and 50 employees, no layoffs. On average, 42% report keeping all employees, with the majority being in ICT, 83%. Again, that goes without explaining, with most of us working from home and all that. So there's a lot of demand on ICT. Real estate, 78%, because people still need a roof over their head. Health and social work, 68%, because this is largely a health crisis. Companies taking this route. On the layoffs, we have 58% have had to lay off, where 24% of firms reporting laying off between 11 to 20 people, while 10% have laid off between 21 to 50 people, with the majority being construction, again with social distance, with less demand for any that sector being an unnecessary right now. Tourism, because of the closure of hotels and move and transport and move and travel, again, and education, because of school closing. On the micro enterprise and startups, the ones between 1 to 9 employees, on the ones that have not laid off, companies in professional services and transport storage report the highest frequency of full job preservation, with 65% and 71% respectively. Those have not laid off in the micro enterprises and startups. On the layoffs, the micro firms have few or non-essential personnel, and yet have 52% overall have had to lay off workers, highly pronounced again in construction, trade, and tourism, with over 60% each. Moving on. On the different sectors, state of employment by sector, again, different sectors have reacted very differently to COVID-19 when it comes to job retention, where for all primary and secondary economy sectors examined, at least 60% of companies have had to let at least some level of staff go. And then depending on the size, they've either closed or temporarily closed. The sectors providing the largest number of jobs were also highest hit by layoffs, with the addition of environment and arts. The largest job retentions are among ICT and financial sector companies at 79 and 78% respectively. Agriculture and security are the most polarized sectors in terms of large layoffs, over 50 people per farm. Large layoffs in agriculture were mostly witnessed in floriculture in March and part of April, due particularly to collapsed demand in Europe at that point, which we all remember. And that has really recovered recently, and so we're starting to see a change in agriculture, especially floriculture. Only 20% of 60 tons of daily cut flowers exports to Europe were sold, with the rest being destroyed in that period. But that has started changing, and the demand has picked up. Layoffs in security were linked to closure of tourism firms and scaled down retail businesses and several offices. And that's where we saw the security firms starting to lay off people. Next. In terms of, again, by company size, education and tourism sectors, education and tourism were particularly hit hard by COVID-19 due to the nature of the pandemic. As of the moment, there's still a large contingent from each sector which has successfully retained all employees, more so for education than tourism, as especially education more and more learn to use the online platform for teaching. For education sector overall, 53% of educational institutions report layoffs. For the ones that report non-layoffs is only 51% of medium-sized and micro-sized education institutions report retentions of all employees. Layoffs, small enterprises, that's the ones with 10 to 50 employees, report the largest percent of all layoffs from the three categories with sufficient data, with only 47% maintaining their entire workforce. In the tourism sector, overall, 64% of tourism firms report layoffs. It appears that in tourism, the larger the company, the less likely it is that it has to retain all its staff, with only 10%, 36%, and 42% full retention in medium-sized, small and micro companies, respectively. No layoffs, 42% of micro and 36% of small tourism firms report retaining all personnel, which is the highest. On layoffs, 90% of medium-sized firms in the tourism sector had to let go of some of their staff, and layoffs in 45% firms affected over 50 employees. Again, as I mentioned, with tourism, you find a lot of what we'd call the daily, the staff that are employed during high season, and they're not there in the low season. So a lot of those staff are not in place right now because the demand has been low, especially in those two sectors. And with agriculture starting to change, we may see a different percentage in terms of layoffs. On the security sector, overall 65% of security firms reported layoffs. Most of the respondents are micro and large companies. On no layoffs, micro-sized security firms have refrained from letting go of their staff, with 83% reporting no job losses. On the layoffs, large security firms have seen the most layoffs, 71% having to let staff go, with 50% of layoffs involving over 50 people per firm. Again, just to remind us, when you talk about large firms, so when we talk in real numbers, they of course have more numbers in terms of what would be in a small firm. So again, being relevant, if it's a firm of 5 people, that's an equivalent to about 20 to 50 people in a large firm. So in terms of real-term numbers, you'll see the large numbers in the big firms, just because they employ more people. Again, on your right, you have the different graphs that show you the different numbers. So I'm not going into the graphs in each page, but I'll let us be able to study that later. In the construction sector, overall, over 50% of respondents from the construction sector have had to lay off staff. Again, it's also a sector that employs a lot of daily wage earners. And so when work is less, those are the first people to be let go, because they are only in when there's demand, the demand is high in a sector. So construction, tourism, and agriculture are sectors that you find that do that a lot, have a lot of daily wage earners. And so those are the people who you find have lost jobs more in those sectors than the permanent staff. No layoffs, significantly more micro enterprises have managed to retain their full workforce at 8% than their small firm counterparts with 16%. On the layoffs, both categories report a significant number of layoffs in the largest bracket for their size. That is 15% of micro firms, which have 1 to 9 employees, have let go of 6 to 10 employees, and 24% of small firms, which have 10 to 50 employees, have had to let go of 21 to 50 employees. In terms of measures taken by companies to mitigate COVID-19 impact, company size plays a significant role in the way companies respond to the changes in the current operating environment, with micro and small enterprises most affected and least likely to adapt. As I said, with the large companies, you have more cushion for a longer time than the small and the micro enterprises. All sectors, excluding education and tourism, 45% of respondents had to close business, with micro and small enterprises most affected, with 62% and 49% all respondents respectively. Significantly, fewer micro and small firms are providing staff with PPE, social distancing at work, and work from home opportunities compared to medium-sized and large firms. They are also less likely to implement online technology just because of their size and the capacity to be able to adapt to the crisis. 12% of small and 11% of medium-sized firms have lowered prices in response to COVID-19, as compared to 5% and 6% for micro and large firms, respectively. Next. In the tourism sector and the education sector, as the other sectors suffer from global decline, with Kenya's travel ban in place, 78% of respondents from the tourism sector had to close business temporarily. Except for large companies, where 85% of respondents have sent employees to work from home, only around 40% of micro, small, and medium enterprises have done the same. On the education sector, with government-mandated school closure, 95% of respondents from the education sector have closed business temporarily. Despite the virtual nature of online technology in the education sector, only 23% of respondents have taken it as a measure to protect their business. This discrepancy is most apparent for micro, 12%, and small, 19% enterprises. Again, because they don't have the capacity to be able to do this in terms of financial muscle and other capacities to be able to do that as bigger companies are able to adapt. In terms of government interventions, we did ask the question, which of the following government interventions have you benefited from? When I started, I said when we engaged the president with our economic framework, with all the different areas that we had raised, the government did come up with, after that, in a week later, with an economic stimulus, and those, some of them have been implemented and some not. And so we asked this question just to see where businesses are with what has been implemented so far. And 89% of respondents reported they expect to benefit from at least one government intervention. 91% and 92% of large and medium-sized companies, respectively, 88% and 87% of micro and small enterprises, respectively. The most popular interventions across all company sizes are reduction of VAT, benefited 52% of respondents, with small enterprises reporting the lowest number at 45%. Reduction of payee and tax relief for those earning less than 24,000 Kenya shillings benefited 40%, with micro and small enterprises reporting the lowest benefit, with 28% and 38% of respondents, respectively. 47% and 38% of the respondents from the medium-sized and large company categories, respectively, reported to benefit from reduction of corporate tax. Micro and small enterprises found this measure less impactful, with 21% and 26% expecting to benefit, respectively. So again, just because of their size, and many of them are in a different tax band. So this doesn't affect many of them as it does with the larger and medium-sized companies. The least number of respondents reported benefiting from payment of VAT refunds and pending bills, which is in line with the request to expedite the process. So this is what has not been actioned, and so there's no benefit yet because it hasn't come through, and so most companies are still waiting for this, and they know that it will affect, it will really help them in meeting their demand, what is pending. Next. Next. In terms of requests for government measures to support businesses, the biggest priority for companies, apart from what we will send you in the economic framework, which will be attached to this survey as updated as per Monday this week, so that you see what has been done, what is pending, and what is in the process. What also came out from this survey is 26% of respondents requesting for help to ensure they can retain their staff through and post COVID-19, followed by settlement of VAT refunds and pending bills. On the staff salaries, there were 431 mentions, 333 of them in education. That is support to pay staff salaries until learning can consume, and free movement of essential staff. On the tax VAT refunds, there were 331 mentions. That was VAT refunds, tax waivers, especially income tax, removal of sector-specific fees and levies. And then on the loan, 23, let's go back. I think something has gone wrong. On the loan, we had 253 mentions, 122 were in education. They wanted to be able to have loan repayment holidays, low interest loans, and some quick loans, because there's a feeling that even for those who are applying loans, it's taking very long to be able to get them even through the banks. Rent, there were 115 mentions, 45 of those being in education, and a lot of them are asking for guidelines for rental relationships, relief subsidy for rental payments. On the bills, there were 114 mentions. That's pending bills. A lot of the businesses are still seeking pending bills from government, both in the national and counties. Those are about 70 mentions, and support with utility bills and other bills. Several ones mentioned that. Out of 1648 responses to this open-ended question, out of there were 1,648 responses to this open-ended question out of 2466 entries. Education, largest response base, numbers are provided where it dominates the number of entries. So you can see in terms of those are some of the measures that businesses ask. This is on top of what we will give you in terms of the matrix that we are working with all the different sectors on the issues that we are following with government. So having said that, I think we come to the end of our survey, and maybe I'll open up for a few questions.
Thank you so much, Carol, for taking us through this entire report. It has very rich insights that we can all draw from. We encourage all the reporters to read and ask us any question where you do not understand something or you need a bit of clarification, because she didn't have enough time to particularly delve into the deepest of the insights that are coming out of this research. So we are in that moment for Q&A, and looking at the chat, I can see a number of questions have been asked. A number of them have also been answered. But please unmute yourself or raise up your hand first, then we are able to pick you out if you have a question.
Yeah, I think raising of hands will be good. And as we wait for that, let me just say, out of this,
I
think raising of hands will be. Let's have raising hands, and as we get the hands up, let me just mention two things that I may have forgotten. One, some of the requests of measures to support business. You can see on your right-hand side the graphs of how those measures will help in either saving jobs and also in the impact of those interventions in terms of jobs and livelihoods, revival and sustain businesses, ease of cash flow liquidity challenges and stabilize business, reduce cost of doing business, reduce the spread of COVID-19, boost business growth, sales and profitability, reduce prices of goods and services. So some of these asks would resort to this if addressed. So that's one of the things I wanted to mention on that. And then when I was talking about private sector contributions, one of the other things that I think we may not have mentioned in the agriculture, well, the floriculture was really struggling with getting the flowers in terms of sales and demand. One of the measures they took in terms of contribution was to be able to offer flowers for free, especially to the frontliners, and that's the medical staff. And they started here in Kenya and did all the major public hospitals. They've also been doing a bit of the private hospitals this week, and then also moved on to one of our largest markets in the UK to do the same. And this is just part of saying, if we're going to be able to keep the jobs in place, because flowers have to be cut or they go to waste. So we can keep the staff by cutting them and giving them out into our frontline staff. And that way we can maintain jobs, even as we wait for other measures like VAT refunds to be done. So that's one of the measures that the flower sector undertook to do. And we really thank them for that. And we hope other sectors can also be as innovative as the floriculture was.
Thank you so much. Any hand up? We should be able to share with you this report on the chat right here. So before you log out, you should be able to download it because it might take a bit of time to send it to you after the meeting. But if you want it immediately, I'll post it on the group chat for you to pick it up. Well, we can't see any hand up. So I guess we are good then. Please, if there's any question, reach out to us. We should be able to clarify anything that you are struggling to understand. Let me go to the chat to just pick out any potential question. Seth Onyango from People Daily, can we quantify how much the virus has eroded from local businesses? Seth, we should be able to carry out this in our coming survey. But looking at the statistics that we have, we did not want to speculate this, but at least from the losses, we can see the average losses per company and per different bands of losses. I think this is something that we should be able to to tell, but it's not part of this analysis at the moment. Any other question? Nabat Wafula, you're asking whether we can get regional reports of the same. Regional, you mean EAC. If that is the case, then there's a counterpart report to this one that we'll be sharing with you that has regional dynamics in terms of COVID and how they're doing the testing, where they are, their graphs basically, but really not a survey like this. We are currently undertaking one with our partner, Trademark East Africa, and I think that should be ready in the coming month. No more question. Okay, please update on the big concern on VAT refund for floriculture. How far has Kepsa pushed for it?
I can respond to that. The floriculture and all the other sectors that are owed on the VAT refunds and pending bills, we're in constant communication with government on that. And actually, after this meeting at about 1 p.m., we'll be discussing this with the board of KFC, that's Kenya Flower Council, which is our member, on how to actually continue to go about this and the real amounts and where the real pains are. So we'll engage on that. So this is an area that we're engaging constantly to see how to get it resolved.
Okay, and I think that's about it for the questions we had on the group chat panel. Seth Onyango.
Yes, hi. I just wanted to know how much the government will need to plug into businesses to keep them afloat from the private sector's perspective.
I think maybe we have put together, if you look at, we'll send you both documents, a survey. There's some, those are the ones in the survey, the last page that I shared, those are additional in terms of requests of what our business would like to see. But in terms of the other document that we're going to share with you, the Kepsa response to COVID, goes sector by sector and to show you issues in terms of what has been addressed, what is pending, and what is in progress. So it is not in terms of cash-based, but it's in terms of what needs to be resolved. In terms of that, there's some sectors that will say have asked for more economic stimulus, and so what we are doing with those sectors is to go deeper with them and say, what does that mean in your sector when you ask for that? And so we'll be updating that document, but we'll share both documents so that you have a view of what businesses per sector and generally are asking in terms of more input from government, but also what they're doing. And that's why I began with what private sector is contributing, because we are all in this together, both government and private sector and the whole public. So we all have to play our part in terms of meeting this, because not one sector can be able to do everything. And we have a small, we are a developing country, so our government is not as big as maybe Germany, which is giving money in terms of to different businesses. But there are different measures being worked on, including even an SME fund in terms so that it can cushion. As you saw from the survey, a lot of the impact is on the micro and small enterprises, just because they do not have the financial muscle and they do not have the capacity to really weather the crisis as much as the bigger companies, even though even them they are affected as much as you have seen. And so those are some of the measures that we are discussing with government in terms of what can be done, so that it's not only the money side, but there are other measures that can be done in terms even of levies, of taxes, so that can cushion business. But also business saying, when we get this, this is what we will do. This is how it will impact us keeping the jobs. This is how it will impact us being able to continue to produce. So that's what we are working. So we're working in what I'd call a concoction of measures than just working on money itself, because money will not be, we don't have enough of that as a country. So we have to work on different measures.
Seth, you may lower down your hand. Any other question? Wesley, CLA, Victor, the agriculture sector has sent many employees on unpaid leave due to pandemic. The NHIF contribution will lapse, and my thought is Kepsa should intervene to have the medical cover not to lapse, especially during this pandemic. We agree with you, Wesley. And I think even as companies send their employees on unpaid leave, it really doesn't affect their the health covers that they are holding, and including the NHIF. So your concern, I think, is actually addressed by the companies. That only affects salaries. I can't see any other hand up. Carol, allow me to share the documents, then we can end the meeting.
Okay, so if there are further questions, please do reach us. You have our numbers, our emails. Please, we are free to reach us on any clarification, any input, any suggestions. We're happy to receive suggestions as you engage with different stakeholders, and we'll take them into account. We also hope to be able to issue another survey by at least mid-June, so that we can also add up what has been missing and also capture what has changed, especially in the floriculture sector, as we've seen demand going up, and also what maybe other new sectors may be affected, or what other sectors may come up on and then show that something has changed in their sector. So we'll try and do this every 1.5 months or every 2 months until the crisis is over. So thank you very much, and we look forward to engaging again.
Thank you so much. Please stay on to receive the document as I'm just about to post them, then we can close the meeting. Salamata. I've muted. Nisha mute. No, I've muted. All right, we've shared the report. So you should be able to download it, and then we can close the meeting. Look at the group.
Share both.
No. I've just shared the survey.
Share plus the other one. I had forwarded to you. Share both.
Okay. Done. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. You may pick the two documents.
Someone who's saying they're not seeing the document, so you may want to also share an email to all the to the media.
Okay, we should be able to then share with you, please. You registered with us, then if you're not able to, could you reach out to us? Pasting my email address there so that you can actually reach to us for the report. You may pick my email down there.